die. Enough. Stop it.
Shalom from Jerusalem. This edition of our educational series, Die, is brought to you by Chut HaM'shulash and Above and Beyond, an Israel-registered educational group for public benefit. Additional information and links to our websites can be found in the video's description area below.
This study focuses on Shaul's second letter to Corinth, chapter 5, verses 20 to 21. Shalom, everyone. In this lesson, we're going to pose the question, was the English translation of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21 tampered with in order to make it conform with a foreign concept that our Torah seems to know nothing about? For our text, we're going to use the New King James Version verse, which reads, "For he, that is God, made him, that is Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin for us." Now, this translation has taught Christians for centuries that Yeshua, meaning Jesus, never sinned even once during his entire lifetime. It also teaches that God somehow and at some point transformed sinless Jesus into a lump of nothing but sin by dumping all of the collective sins of mankind throughout time upon him. Then God had him killed so that all sin would disappear from those who believe, and they would then become righteous in God's eyes. But is this interpretation really possible? Is it supported by the Greek text behind this translation? Well, let's take a look and find out. Here's our text. "For he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us." Well, it turns out that these English words and their Greek equivalents, for oti, him, avton, and to be, ine, don't even exist in the original Greek text. What appears instead are the following Greek words: ton mignota amartian, hyperimon amartian epiasen. Now, when we translate those words into English, they would render as follows. Mashiach was he who did not know sin. He, that is God, made sin for our benefit. But does that make any sense? Would God really make sin so that man could somehow benefit from it? To answer this question and solve the dilemma, we're going to have to compare the grammatical structure and tagging of the last four Greek words found in 2 Corinthians 5:21, namely, hyperimon, amartian, epiasen, with other passages in Greek that share the exact same grammatical structure and tagging that we find here, in order to see if the King's translation is consistent in 2 Corinthians 5:21. In addition, we're going to need to recognize that the Greek term amartian can legitimately be translated either as sin or a sin offering, a chatat, and only the context of this verse can make that final determination for us. So first we're going to identify the grammatical tagging. In this case, we have a preposition, hyper, which can be accusative or genitive, followed by a personal plural pronoun, imon, followed by a feminine singular accusative noun, in this case, amartian, which can mean sin or sin offering, and that's followed by a verb, a third person singular aorist active indicative verb, in this case, epiasen. Our search yields at least one case in point. When the Roshei HaKohanim HaSofrim VeHaSkenim, meaning the senior Kohanim, the scribes, and the elders, came to Yeshua, recorded for us in Mark chapter 12, verse 12, and there we can read that these men knew that Yeshua had spoken the parable against them. The grammatical tagging and structure of those words, he had spoken the parable against them, matches exactly with the grammatical structure of 2 Corinthians 5:21. When we compare the translation of both verses, here's what we find out. In Marcos 12:12 and in 2 Corinthians 5:21, we have a preposition followed by a pronoun, followed by a noun, and then a verb, and all matching the grammatical structure and the tagging in both cases. In the case of Marcos 12:12, pros avtus tin parabolini pen, and in 2 Corinthians, iper imon amartian epiasen. It's here that we discover a flawed translation in 2 Corinthians 5:21. In Marcos 12:12, the English makes sense. Towards them, the parable he had spoken. But in 2 Corinthians 5:21, the translation simply doesn't make any sense. For us, sin he made. And so the translators had to scramble to bring us their solution. In order to create sensibility for this text, they added the English verb to be and the preposition him. He made him. And they came up with, he made him to be sin for us.
You're out of your Vulcan mind.
Gvirotai v'rabotai, that is tampering with the text.
Captain, what do we do?
Well, the solution is that we have to go back to the drawing board. And when we do, this is our result. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 20. Thus, on behalf of Mashiach, we are representatives, as if God were making an appeal through us. We are making our plea. Restore your good relations, meaning make peace with God in view of Mashiach. And then in verse 21, ton, who, me, did not, nota, no, that is, had no experience with, amartian, a sin offering, iperimon, yet on our behalf, amartian, a sin offering, epiasen, he shall make. When we put all of this together, the verse would render into English like this. Mashiach, from verse 20, who though he knew not, that is, previously was unfamiliar with, had no experience or skill with a sin offering, yet on our behalf a sin offering he shall make, so that we might become the righteousness of God by means of him. Some may object, saying, you're tampering with the text. You are watering down the gospel message. You're guilty of altering the primary purpose of the work of quote-unquote Christ on our behalf. Well, if that's so, who first tampered with the text and who made the first changes? Shaul, the Jew who knew his Torah and wrote accordingly? Or non-Jewish translators much, much later who came along and dropped in, he made him to be sin for us? Was it not Shaul who also wrote in Romans 1:16, indeed, I'm not ashamed of this good news. In fact, it is the power of God leading to salvation for all who trust Hashem, for the Jew first, but also for the non-Jew. And therefore, which message would a Jew be ashamed of? He made him to be sin for us, or he who knew not, that is, he had no experience offering a sin offering, shall yet make a sin offering on our behalf. The Jew, first and foremost, would not be ashamed of this message. On this matter of Christianity's blood gospel, it is inevitable that disagreements are going to ensue. But consider that from its inception, and whenever or wherever Avotenu Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov found themselves, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through his Torah, not only serviced and supported at all times an example that no human sacrifice actually be carried out, but he also forbade us from even thinking of this as a requirement or considering it as a means to appease him as a remedy for sin. And yet, all the while, the nations and the peoples around us kept demanding this practice for themselves and their gods. And they tried throughout the ages to force their traditions upon us as well. We knew, however, that this was the basis for all idolatry, and it would mark the turning point when Am Yisrael abandoned the Torah of Elohei Yisrael. The Torah is clear. It simply forbids this practice upon pain of death, or worse, being cut off from amongst our own people. Hashem never placed the sins of the world throughout this age upon any single man, and thus converting him into sin, and then killed him so that sin would be eradicated. Rather, the Kohen atones for sin in and through the temple service by symbolically transferring those sins to an animal who is then taken away to die. That's our lesson for this episode. We hope you will join us next time. Until then, Shalom u'lihitraot miYerushalayim.